Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Christ in Me with Addie, where we seek to live out a John 3:30 life. John 3:30 says, "He must become greater and greater, and I less and less." Let's be real. In today's world, it can seem impossible to live out what the Bible calls us to do. Not only can it be hard to understand sometimes, but finding the time to read the Bible, to understand the Bible, to know the Bible, it can just be overwhelming. So I created this podcast so we could walk alongside each other, share some of our stories and struggles, but also where the Lord is bringing us, so that we can encourage one another and stay rooted in His Word. It's my prayer that you walk away from each episode saying, I know that is Christ in me. I know Christ in me. So let's get into today's topic. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Christ in Me with Addie, where we talk about how God becomes greater and greater in our lives and ourselves less and less. Today, we are joined by Jonathan, so it's Christ in Me with Addie and Jonathan. Say hey, Jonathan.
Hey, how's it going?
So I brought Jonathan on today. I'm going to explain the topic a little bit first before we kind of talk about all of his great qualities and features and experiences. But today we're going to be talking about ministry behind the scenes. So maybe you're a high schooler who just graduated and you kind of feel the call in your life to go into ministry, or maybe you're my situation where you found out like in your late 20s, I think I want to go into ministry. This episode is for you because we're going to talk about ministry behind the scenes. We're going to discuss leadership, burnout, working at a church, and just kind of set the real expectation for what it's like. Because I think sometimes from the outside, you can see like the production and the worship team, you know, if you have a more modern church and be like, that is so cool. But there's still things you have to face like any other workplace. But serving the Lord, I can speak from experience, is so great. So I wanted to bring on Jonathan today to talk about his history, not only as a pastor's kid, but also someone who used to work at a church and now someone who's kind of in the entrepreneurial space within ministry. And I wanted to say too, even if you don't feel called to vocational ministry, which is basically just where you receive a salary for ministry, we're all called as believers in Christ through the Great Commission stated in Matthew 28, verse 19, that we're all called to share the gospel. So regardless of whether or not you take on ministry as a full-time career, we're all called to share the gospel. So all that to say, let's introduce our guest, Jonathan. Welcome to the show. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I live in San Antonio, Texas. I'm married. I have one toddler and a baby that's imminently on the way as we're doing this podcast, like in the next 2 weeks. So I'm really excited about that. We're getting our house ready for all that goodness. But yeah, I was a missionary kid to Guatemala for 6 years. My dad was missionary there. And we came back to the US and was a principaled kid and then a pastor's kid. And then whenever I was working for my dad, or whenever my dad was the pastor, I began working at the church there. Went to college while I was working at the church and grew there. It was kind of an interesting experience. My dad was asked to pastor this church that had just gone through like a massive church split. Oh. And there was like a ton of debt and like a lawsuit pending, and like there was like 75 people left that had all been really hurt. And it was an interesting experience to walk into and learn about ministry. But it was, I don't know, it was really cool. Like at the same time, I loved working at the church. And the only reason we stopped working at the church was when I got married, my wife wanted to go to physical therapy school, and where we lived, there was no physical therapy school. So we left. So yeah, I mean, I actually had a great experience working at a church. I know a lot of people who are no longer working at churches or doing what I sort of do have maybe a bad taste in their mouth toward working at a church, but I loved it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think church for a lot of people is like that sort of consumer thing where you just come in and like you enjoy all the feel good feels of church and you don't have to deal with any of the things going on behind the scenes. But I can speak, to just the reality of working in a church. You still face those hard things. Like you said, the word like lawsuit, a lot of people hurt, unfortunately, those things do still happen. So I guess, how do you think that you avoided that church hurt amidst some like crazy things that were going on?
Yeah, I mean, I owe a lot of it, I feel like, to my dad. He is a phenomenal guy. So also surviving being a pastor's kid, which is its own thing. He was really good at bringing it back to, we serve Jesus, we don't serve people. We serve Jesus through serving people. But we're not looking for the gratification. We're not looking for the approval
Yeah.
of people. And ultimately we're working to serve God. So you do get stabbed in the back,
Mhm.
or, maybe accused of things or different things that are very hurtful. But
Yeah.
you ultimately have to come back to, I'm serving Jesus
Mhm.
and he loves these people. So I'm going to love these people,
Yes.
and understanding that there's also good in it. I think it's so easy to focus on the bad. And maybe this is a, function of my personality type. I tend to focus on the good, but
Yeah.
understanding that, man, a lot of really good stuff happened. I feel like there's a lot of stories I can think of people who I was involved in, really setting them on a course with Jesus, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that is. And I'm the same way. I'm such an optimist, and I think as people and as Christians, we really do need to lead with this approach of like always assuming the best in people. And
Mhm.
so church is that place where, bad things still do happen sometimes, like misrepresentations of Jesus do happen, but
Yeah.
it's Jesus who said that I came for the sick, not the healthy. And that's
Yeah.
why people go to church. We know we're hypocrites. We know we all fall short of the glory of God. And like that's why we're there. But I think it's through Jesus's example, with the guidance of the Holy Spirit that we learn how to forgive each other, how to heal. And so I'm so grateful to hear that the things you faced didn't like push you away from the church
Yeah.
space, because I'm such a church advocate. Like I grew up in a really exclusive denomination and am now
Mhm.
non-denominational. So I say frequently here that the same place I was hurt before is where I found that healing. So
Yeah.
yeah, working at a church, it's interesting because you meet every dynamic of personality that there is, and
Yeah.
then you have to deal with it.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, you talk about it. Forgiveness was a huge part of my journey. And there was one person I think that hurt me the most.
Mhm.
And it was right around the time I was getting married to my wife or dating or something like that. And she wanted to go to this guy's ministry, this new ministry that he had hurt me so much. And I snapped at her, and it pointed to me that I had a lot of unforgiveness in my heart.
Yeah.
And I think things like that, whenever we don't pay attention to those warning signs that we are, harboring bitterness towards someone, that's where we're in a danger zone of a burnout, which we might talk about later,
Yeah.
or just that, bitterness turning into a hatred of ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with that being said, ministry is something that can be difficult to navigate. And then there's all these like, our spiritual lives are so deeply connected to our emotional lives. And so I think
Hmm.
that's where like hurts can run deep sometimes. But
Oh
how did
yeah.
you know with like just solid clarity? When did you experience the call of ministry on your life?
I don't think that I had a specific calling
Mm.
per se. I think I always grew up around ministry. So I saw my dad as a missionary, as a pastor, as in every area, even as a principal, there was this ministry element of taking care of people, of pointing them to Jesus, of serving. So I've always seen that modeled in my life.
Mhm.
And so that was just sort of a natural extension. I think if you're a pastor's kid, you're probably just going to find yourself in ministry like as a default.
Yeah.
But then the heart for it grew slowly as I started doing less overtly ministerial type things,
Mhm.
like like I went to school for marketing, so I was doing some graphic design or some websites or some media stuff, and then started seeing, I'm working with volunteers, and I have a chance to pastor these people, or I'm working with a worship team, I was leading worship, and I had a chance to pastor these many young people that were on my team, and walk them through some stuff. So I started getting more of probably a slower boil, if you will, of like the frog in the kettle getting boiled, of getting that heart for ministry. It wasn't necessarily a particular calling, but yeah, and as you said before, the calling is, whether you work at a church, whether you work at an accounting office,
Mhm.
the calling is there. I just had the opportunity to do it as my full-time job, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. And something that you just said, I absolutely love, because I have a friend she works in a dental office, and she talks about how like it's so personal. And I felt this too as someone like laying in the dental chair, like they're all up in your face and you're just like,
Yes,
hello. Like, but she talks about how as she's, helping kids put on their little rubber bands on their braces and stuff, she prays over them because it is so personal and
that's cool.
intimate in a weird way. And so
Yeah.
that's just an idea of how you can embrace ministry no matter what job you do. So tell us a little bit about like the growth from working at a church as a pastor's kid, like always having the door open to default on that, to then growing into kind of the entrepreneurial things that you took on after college.
Yeah. So that was also, I think, probably something modeled for me because my dad was a missionary, which is,
Mhm.
and frankly, even in ministry, even in working at a church or like this, where you kind of have to be self-motivated. You have to, a lot of times when you work at a church, unless you're in a very specific role, your pastor throws in an idea and you're like, well, let's try this. And it's very collaborative. Which is also what's really fun about working at a church is a lot of, you're kind of creating what it is in the
Mhm.
moment. So working at a church, I was still very entrepreneurial in that way, but it's also kind of been in me from the beginning. When we were in Guatemala, when we come back to the US, I would bring coins, like just Guatemalan currency, and
Mhm.
like sell them to my American friends for like a huge markup
That's
as like a
hilarious.
novelty. So it's my first currency trading is what I was doing, but yeah. So I was always like selling little things. I would make those stress
Mhm.
balls with what's it called, with balloons with flour inside, and like I would sell them to my friends, and just always found a way to. It wasn't even about the money. I think it was just about like, I don't know. This is fun to do. I've always
Yeah.
enjoyed coming up with a product idea or coming up with a business idea. It's just something fun for me.
Mhm. Dude, Jesus would have been flipping tables at your church with the Guatemalan currency.
It
That's
wasn't at
hilarious.
church that I was selling it,
Okay,
so
that makes it a little better.
and I wasn't selling doves or anything for sacrifice. It was fine. We're good.
That's so funny. Okay, that was a Christian niche joke, but I'll explain it later.
Yeah, yeah,
Anyways,
yeah.
so tell me about in terms of like working at a church, where is everywhere you kind of held, being a pastor's kid, I'm sure you were
Mhm.
probably shoved in kids' men some days, you were shoved in, whatever needed filled that day, but where all have you had experience in like within ministry in a church specifically?
Yeah. So at my church, it was primarily in creative realms. So graphic design, website, social media, worship leading, tech, which meant like sound, video, lights, slides, all that stuff. Obviously, in all of that, leading volunteers was a huge part of it. Since then, just volunteering at churches, I've been, involved in first impressions and like the welcome team
Yeah.
in kids ministry, more in the check-in process. I'm not a huge fan
Mhm.
of other people's kids. I love my kids, but I don't love other. Like I love kids, but I don't want to like be in charge of them, I
I'm
guess.
with you. I'm with you on that one.
So yeah, those are the main things I think I've done. But I just, I always pay attention, and I love seeing
Mhm.
what different ministries are going through and what people do in the different roles. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I mean, it's been evolving so much recently, and I also it's weird because you're kind of like an alternate reality version of my husband and I because I also do the social media at my church, the graphic design, and then he's kind of like the techie extraordinaire. Like he set up this entire podcast system that I have right now to be able to do this with you. So
Very nice.
yeah. So what do you think is what has been your hardest kind of situation in ministry? And then we'll talk about your best situation or experience in ministry.
I think it would come down to ministry plus pastor's kid, because in both worlds, well, and also worship leader, it was like the trifecta of attention on me, right? Because um, as a pastor's kid, people just pay attention to you.
Yeah.
In ministry, people pay attention to you, and then as a worship leader, very much so. I would always have people trying to help me. They were well-meaning, but
Yeah.
they would say, God gave me a dream for you the other night," and
Yeah.
it was like a very discouraging dream. Like
Yeah.
I'm like, you're saying that God is telling you that I'm arrogant, right? Like that was what it kind of boiled down to. And so a lot of people questioning motives, a lot of
Mhm.
people assuming things about me, and it kind of hurt. Like
Yeah.
because I honestly, I feel like I had pretty good motives in ministry for the most part. We always, our motives always slip, right? Like we have good
Yeah.
motives some days and bad motives other days. But I was like, I really want to serve God. I really want to serve the people that I'm working alongside. I want to serve the church.
Mhm.
So it's always tough when people are just questioning motives like that. And that just happens in any. I posted on social the other day that like being a pastor's kid has the same amount of church hurt, but it's like church hurt concentrate. You know how you have like
Mm.
orange juice concentrate
Yeah.
that's like really like boiled down? It's kind of like that where like you get the same stuff, but it's just a lot more of it.
Yeah. I can totally relate because my husband and I both do the worship team as well, and our brother-in-law is the worship leader. And I remember one week he came backstage and you could just tell he had not the best interaction with someone.
Mhm.
And he wears like the same pair of shoes often as most of us do. Like we have our set pair of tennis shoes
Our
that are like
favorite, yeah.
our white sneaks for the
Yeah.
for worship leading. And somebody came up to them, they're like, I noticed that you wear the same shoes every weekend. Like, if you can't afford new shoes,
Oh,
we'll buy you new shoes. But for him, it was very like a put down 'cause he's like, I love these shoes. They're clean looking. Like
yeah,
I go home and I wash them each week. So I totally get that. The eyes are on you and it just sometimes feels like even with the best intentions, people can push
yeah.
their convictions on you at times too. And so that's the weird part of navigating just relationships. But with that, what's the best experience you had in ministry or what has kind of fulfilled you the most?
Yeah, I think it was getting to work with my dad, actually. I think there's this cool dynamic as a pastor's kid where I understood my dad's heart for the church more than anyone else on the
Mhm.
team. So it was so easy to just, if he had an idea, I kind of knew where his head was. Along with that, because I was so supportive of him, and I would say this to anyone who works at a church, when you develop that trust with your pastor, they give you a lot of trust in response.
Yeah.
So I got to try a lot of really fun things. A lot of them were maybe bad ideas when I look back at them, but my dad was willing. We were willing to together try these things, and it was just fun. And there was this general sense in the church that like, if we made a mistake or if we did something that was wonky, like there was a lot of trust. We
Yeah.
rarely had someone like get so mad at the church and leave the church because we
Mhm.
tried something and failed, because there was just this sort of group mentality of like, hey, let's all try this together. And it was really fun.
Yeah, so I have to be honest, I first learned about your page because my staff at our church, we were sending your memes back and forth.
Uh,
And we had just recently bought a new LED screen off of a,
oh
like,
no.
sketchy site, and, we're like, "Oh, it's such a good price," you know? And we've just been sending your LED screen memes back and forth to each other because like, pixels are going out left and right, like, one side of it is responding different than the other side, and so, I just found it so surprising that you don't currently work at a church now because your memes are the ones that, like, I shouldn't be laughing at because I get a little convicted, but they're also so true. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing right now and sort of what you've built up with Sunday Social and your other
Mhm.
sort of entrepreneurial, what would you call it, adventures or,
Yeah,
things you've been
endeavors.
focused. Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go, endeavors.
Yeah. So whenever I was working at the church, I started this website called Church Stage Design Ideas. We were in this building that was built in the 70s. It was beautiful, like natural wood, tall ceilings, but it wasn't reflective of the type of ministry we were doing inside. We were doing very modern worship. My dad, while he was older, it was very relevant teaching. It wasn't very high church, which is what the building reflected. So we started doing stage design to not to like wow people, but to try to set expectations when you walked into the building as to what you were going to get from the service. So I started putting that on online and started researching what other people were doing. So just kind of created this resource. It's still going today. I don't run it anymore. I've turned it over to someone else, but I was able to start turning that into a full time income. And then whenever my wife had the opportunity to move to another city, that's what I did full time.
Mhm.
And then along the way, I wrote a book. I wrote a devotional for creative minds, and I got the like book writing bug. So I started writing more books to help with like first impressions or like that
Yeah.
welcome team type stuff, with leadership, specifically about burnout, with leading volunteers, and writing all that stuff. And then along the way too, a really good friend of mine who's this phenomenal designer, we had this idea to start Sunday Social,
Mhm.
which we create social media graphics for churches. We saw everyone was focusing on Sunday morning, like, and that was the mantra for like the longest time was like, keep it focused on Sunday.
Mhm.
Keep it Sunday saint. I think it was what people like the KISS method, like keep it focused on Sunday. But then social media came along and we have this huge opportunity to talk to people throughout the week. And not only that, especially during COVID, it, we
Mhm.
couldn't maybe have our service. So how are we going to communicate with people? Social
Yeah.
media suddenly became the most important thing for
Mhm.
us. And nobody was really resourcing that and creating content for Sunday morning or for the rest of the week. So we started Sunday Social, and it's just been fun to see how it grows and how we can, trying to create a product for social media, which is so
Mhm.
rapidly changing, has been challenging.
Yeah.
But we've moved into video, we do carousel posts, we do all the stuff that as we're learning, as I'm learning through social media, and all the teams learning.
Mhm.
It's just fun to see what we can do to help churches do social media well. And in that vain. I do my own silly little videos on Instagram, mostly reels for people who work at churches. But if you volunteer, you're probably going to relate to it too.
Yeah.
But yeah, always looking for a way to make people laugh just because that's my personality.
Yes, Jonathan is the meme master, and it's so funny, like, when you see someone online, you start to kind of picture how they might be, and I thought for sure you would be, like, super sarcastic, maybe, like, The Office style humor, just based on the memes, but hearing that you're such an optimist and you make these sort of memes that are, like, I wouldn't say they're pessimistic, but when you read the ones about, like, being corrected by the pastor's wife and stuff, I was just rolling.
Yeah.
So it's so
Some of
funny.
those some of those are like, I feel like a little bit reflecting of what I've learned from other people working with other people, because I know that's what
Yeah.
people feel like. I don't know that I've ever had a bad pastor's wife experience. My current church, like my pastor's wife is like I'm really good friends with the pastor and I
Mhm.
like his wife better than him. So like she's amazing. Obviously my mom was amazing. So I've had really good experience with pastor's wife, but I just know that like that's not always the case, unfortunately. So some of it's just like, low hanging fruit, like, oh, this will make people laugh, right? Like always making fun of the youth pastor always goes over well. Like
Absolutely.
so there's definitely like some unfair humor that I point out there, but it's all hopefully in good fun and out of love.
It is, and it makes us feel all connected. I feel so seen, so heard, looking at your memes. So thank you for that. But yeah, it's so funny that you talk about Sunday Social and just getting to hear like behind the scenes of the makings of that because our church has a subscription to that.
Oh, cool.
And I came into my church very similar. It's a very dated building, and people joke that it looks like an air hanger, like somewhere you would store a blimp because it's just a giant like half circle because it used to be a gymnasium. And so we've added a
um,
lot of the production elements to try to make this more modern and to kind of take that more non-denom approach to our worship style and things like that. So Sunday Social has been huge for our church because it kind of helped me see as a creative what others are doing in the industry to then learn and grow to be making them on my own too. So it's
yeah.
really cool what you guys made, and I do think it's helping a lot of churches. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's fun to do. It's really cool too with Sunday Social is what one of my main roles is coming up with content, like coming up with what we're going to create. And
Mhm.
it's fun to be able to hopefully help churches with like the conversations they're having, even like the stuff you decide to post is the stuff that people are going to comment on or
Mhm.
respond to, and your DMs are gonna fill up with conversations about what you posted. So it's really cool. It's a unique thing to be able to kind of be a part of what churches are preaching about on
Yeah.
social media, like
Yeah.
a lot of churches, and it's really fun.
Yeah, and it's helped me a ton with avoiding burnout because I don't know if you would agree with this. Let me know your thoughts, but I think a lot of departments, we call them departments in ministry,
Yeah.
are headed by like a single person.
Oh yeah.
Would you agree? Yeah.
Or like 10 departments by one single person.
Yeah, or like you kind of have half of one department,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
everything. So for example, I do the social media and graphic design. It started as social media and then has like moved into graphic design because that was a need.
yeah.
And then they found out I like to sing, so then I got thrown on the worship team and then I got put into youth because they needed somebody to do worship for the youth. So you can probably relate to just
Oh
they
yeah.
really try to stretch people's abilities, your time, talent, and treasure, as they say.
Yeah.
So, I want to talk a little bit about burnout and a book that helped me a lot with that, which is your book, Don't Burn Out, Burn Bright. Do you want to kind of give an overview of the book before I dive into it a little bit?
Yeah, so me and my friend Jason, we wrote this book together. We've written a lot together. It's fun. It's really fun to just work with friends and do cool stuff. So I'll say that.
Yeah.
But we always look for chances to write together because we just like each other. But we have both been in ministry a long time, and we've seen, unfortunately, a ton of our friends burning out,
Hmm.
and maybe even seen the pull to it ourselves. And we wanted to like, there's a lot of resources out there, like how to bounce back from burnout or how to
Yeah.
recover from burnout. I'm like, man, what a tragic thing that those books are needed in the first place.
Hmm.
But then that we even have to get to that point in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Like, so we're like, what if we made a book instead of about like, how to not burn out or how to recover from burnout? But we're like, what if we could do like the opposite of like how to like not even not burn out, but just like go hardcore? Because anyone who gets in ministry wants to do a ton. Like you probably like, even though you might feel like you're maybe like verging on burnout sometimes, you're like, I
Hmm.
love doing all of this stuff.
Yeah,
That's the fun of
absolutely.
working at a church, is getting to do 20 different things. And like, yeah, you're leading worship, and then you get off stage and designing graphic behind
Hmm.
stage, right? Like it's a lot of fun. But at the same time, if we're not careful, if we're not intentional about the way we approach it, we can go toward burnout, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that, amazing stuff? How do you, keep doing these amazing things, keep, going hard in ministry, but not burn out? And
Mhm.
that was our motivation for writing it. And yeah, I hope it's helping people for that.
Yeah, it really helped me a lot, and I really liked in this book, there's, like, a burnout assessment test that you can
Mhm.
kinda take in the beginning, so that was a really good way to just kick it off and assess, like, before I go into reading this, where am I at personally?
Yeah.
And I'm like you, where I really thrive in busyness, but I think a lot of times, a lot of us wear busyness as a badge of honor, and burnout
Oh
is
yeah.
the result of that, and I really liked is it okay if I read, like, a little paragraph from a
Please do.
part
Yeah.
cool. I really liked where you talked about our goal should be health and not hustle. And so I kind of wanted to read this part and then we can comment off of it. But I really liked where you talked about how like hustle culture is something that's so celebrated right now. And it says, this is page 18 for anybody who gets the book and is interested. They wrote, it's an unhealthy form of entrepreneurship and it becomes so pervasive because the internet has made it possible for anyone to become an entrepreneur. Whether we're a social media influencer, manage an Etsy shop, or have some other side hustle, we're doing some form of entrepreneurism. And the hustle culture has made us believe that we have to post every day, sell just one more product, gain more followers, and it's a perpetual more, more, more mentality. When we never seem to arrive, the cycle leads towards total burnout. And I
Yeah.
really related to that, especially being in the social media space, because like I said, I am the single like department head. And then I also am leading volunteers on top of that. So Sunday Social helped me with the need of being able to be like, okay, this post is already made. It goes along with what we're preaching this week. I'm going to throw this up on
Yeah.
a Wednesday and I'll make something original for Sunday. So what do you have to say, I guess, about hustle culture and people who feel trapped in that like cyclical, just never ending demand?
Yeah, I think something that liberated me a while back, because I think all of this comes back to a degree to comparison, right? Like we
Mhm.
see what other people have or what they seem to have, and we say, I need that. If I have that, I'll be fulfilled.
Yeah.
But I've been finding out more and more as I get into conversations with the people that are often the ones that we're seeing that we're comparing ourselves to
Mhm.
is and I don't want to like throw anyone under the bus, but like everyone's lying
Yeah.
like to a degree. Like
It's
like
kinda
it's
true.
it's all a lie or it's smoke and mirrors. That's what my brother
Yep.
says about it. Like, in the business world, what you do
Mhm.
is like, we had $1 million of monthly recurring revenue this month,
Mhm.
which means they had $1 million come in, right? And it's going to keep coming in.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, they had $1 million come in. And then you like, if you looked at their books, you would see that $990,000 went out, right? Like their
Yep.
costs are super high, right? So like we focus on the good numbers and not the
Mhm.
bad numbers.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the times, you see people who have an amazing car and you don't
Mhm.
realize their monthly car payment is crippling to them, like really
Yeah.
they can't afford to get guac on their chipotle because of that car payment, right? Like we always see the good stuff and no one ever shows us the bad stuff. So it's not, and maybe people aren't specifically lying, but they're
Mhm.
lying by omission. They're leaving
Yeah.
things out that like, do I really want that? So I was even having this conversation with my wife the other day and she was like, she knows she could get more money doing this particular thing,
Mhm.
but she's like, I'm not willing to deal with the stress of that. Like
Yeah.
the life that I want for our family and for ourselves, it's not worth it. And I
Mhm.
I make decisions constantly like that. I'm like, I can make more money if I did this, but I'm not willing to do that for my own heart. Like
Right.
I don't need to put myself through that hustle and just like go 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 go. So
Yeah.
that's been a lot of it. It's just like liberating yourself to like a I don't need what they seem to have because they probably don't even have it in the first place, and then
Mhm.
b decide the life you want to live, not from a material place, but from
Mhm.
a like how do I want my heart to feel 5 years from now? How do I
Mhm.
want my relationship with my spouse or with my kids or with my family to be 5 years from now? So,
Mhm.
and then make those decisions that lead to that.
Yeah.
And
That's
hustle is never the solution, is never the thing that's going to get you where you want to go.
It's so true, and I think a lot of Christians feel that way because the Bible has so much to say about, like, avoiding laziness. There's so much
Mhm.
in the Bible about not being a sloth
Yeah.
human, and then not enough about, like, what if I'm just this, like, hamster constantly on the wheel that is always striving, you know? And it really does speak to both, but I think what we're facing in our world right now is that hamster on a wheel, never-ending cycle,
Yeah.
and so I think a lot of Christians feel like, when is what I have done, like, when is that enough for today's
Yeah.
work or for a life's work or for my career? And so have you experienced burnout on an extreme level that led to the writing of this book, or is it just something that you noticed and you're like, "Hey, I think I could provide some help here?"
Yeah, I think it was just seeing so many friends because the thing is,
Mhm.
typically, I've had burnout moments, and I think this is a pretty critical distinction. Like, we all feel burnt out at times, right?
Yeah.
Like, I feel exhausted. If you work at a church, it's usually after Christmas or Easter that you feel
Yeah.
burnt out, right? Like, and like there's a situational burnout thing,
Yeah.
similar with anxiety. Like I can have anxiety in a moment, but there's a cycle that can develop. Anxiety, depression, burnout, where like it's not just a situational moment. With anxiety, you're like, okay, just go for a walk, eat a good meal,
Mhm.
like that can help with like a situational anxiety. But if you're in a cycle of anxiety, those simple things aren't going to get you out of it, right? And the
Yeah.
same thing with burnout. Like, so hopefully, we will all feel times of being burnt out, but not
Mhm.
hopefully in that cycle of downward spiral. So yeah, I've never fortunately experienced that. I think it's been, you can say the grace of God, like it's been like
Mhm.
coincidentally, like I stopped working at a church right whenever it was getting into a new building
Mhm.
and, going through massive amount of growth. So maybe I just, like, God was like, oh, I'm just going to get you out of there real quick. I don't think that's how it happened because then, obviously some people stayed and it's not like they did anything wrong, right? Like,
Right.
um, it is the grace of God, but that doesn't mean people who haven't burnt out don't have the grace of God, or who have burnt out don't have the grace of God, if that makes sense.
Right.
But I don't want to be like judgmental in that. But
Mhm.
yeah, so I mean, I think, and it's interesting you talked about before this, you talked about the idea of, scripture talking about hustle. At the same time, last time I read through the Bible, I was shocked at the Old Testament,
Mhm.
how, especially in the with the prophets, how
Yeah.
much they were like, hey, Israel, you're not honoring the Sabbath.
Mhm.
Like, God's mad at you right now because you're not honoring the Sabbath. And it's like shocking that God took it so seriously. Like, he had some harsh words for his
Yeah.
people when they didn't set aside that time to rest. And it was kind of crazy because it gave me a little bit more like, how in the New Testament the Pharisees are always getting mad at Jesus for like
Yeah.
healing people on the Sabbath or work.
Mhm.
Like, I'm like, well, I kind of get it. Like, and not to relate to the Pharisees too much, but I'm like, it seems like God took that really seriously. So
Mhm.
they probably should take it seriously. So it's interesting, just shocking how much God cared about his people resting and honoring the Sabbath.
Yeah. My husband and I were just talking about this too, because being in ministry, I think you have to actively be like, I am taking my Sabbath today. And some people are a little like legalistic and like, it has to be Sunday, but like, that's
Yeah.
not realistic in ministry. We literally work on the Sabbath to provide that experience for others. And so we have to be more conscious about when we're going to rest. And
Yeah.
we were going through the Old Testament together and got to the 10 Commandments. And, being in church, I was in church my whole life, even though I wasn't a believer my whole life. And I knew the 10 Commandments, but really seeing the one that said, like, be sure to rest, I was like, man,
Yeah.
that's like a moral law of God. And I need to take that seriously for myself. And so I definitely think getting rest, proper rest is so important to avoiding burnout. And that's something I've experienced myself.
And
So,
and it's just, sorry to throw this in
oh
there, but
yeah.
like this was something that kind of blew my mind was
Mhm.
was I would always, and maybe this helped me avoid burnout, I don't know, but like I talked to my dad one day and I was like, I feel like people are always asking me to do new things. And I
Mhm.
was in college and working at the church, and I was like, and I do have time. So I
Mhm.
feel bad saying no
Yeah.
because like, hey, do you have time to help me with this? And like, yes, I do. But that meant that I probably wouldn't get to spend some time with my friends or hang out with my girlfriend at the time, which is now my wife. But like,
Mhm.
and he's like, you have to understand that like downtime and rest
Mhm.
is a valid use of your time.
Yes.
So you can actually say, I don't have time to do that because I need to rest,
Yes.
which was a shocking thing to me to think that like you can schedule in 30 minutes of rest and like that's as important as a meeting. Like, no, I'm
Absolutely.
sorry, I gotta rest right now. And like
Mhm.
that blew my mind. And I think hopefully that can like liberate some people who don't
Yeah.
get that like it is a valid use of your time. Like it is an important use of your time to rest, to be intentional with rest, like you were saying.
Absolutely. That like just hit spot on because my husband and I, so the day that we're recording this is a Friday, and Friday is my day off in my job. And my husband typically has it off as well. He's remote, so he can typically take it off so we can have that rest day together. And someone from church was like, hey, like we need new. So my husband drums on the worship team, but he also used to be our live sound engineer. He's now gotten another job with another company, which was great because it helped us kind of start our family and get married. But, anyways, So somebody hit him up and they were like, hey, like I know today's like typically your rest day, but we need some new cymbals for the drums. Like, would you be willing to go here and pick them up and like pick out some? And so, those are hard things where it's like, yeah, I could help there, but you got to
Yeah.
respect. It's just like having healthy boundaries, I would say, in ministry is
Yeah.
really important, and sticking to those and understanding that sticking to those healthy boundaries helps everybody stay on like a happy, peaceful, joyful level with the Lord, and keeps you right
Yeah.
with the Lord, keeps you balanced, things like that. So boundaries, huge. Can you speak to boundaries at all, or like anything you had where you had to really set boundaries?
Yeah, I think one kind of mantra that I always had is I want to be able to joyfully say yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
whenever someone asks me for something and I can say yes, I want to be excited about being able to say yes.
Mhm.
So what that means is I need to be very good about saying no
Yeah.
to the things that like this is not going to be good. This is not going
Mhm.
to. So I'm volunteering at my church. I think for a while I was like, hey guys, any graphic design needs you need just throw them to me, right? And
Mhm.
then someone asked me for something and I did it and I was happy to do it. And then they like started asking for more and more changes, and I'm like, you know what? I can see where this is going, and in order to be able to keep joyfully saying yes, I'm going to say no right now
Yeah.
because I want to be able to guard that joy of the yes,
Mhm.
right? So saying no is actually a great thing because we
Mhm.
should be saying yes joyfully whenever it's time, whenever we feel
Yes.
like
Mhm.
right, whenever we feel like we have the capacity or it lines up with what we need to do. So
Yeah.
getting good at saying no is one of the most loving things you can actually do because it
Mhm.
means you're not going to be like, because then you have those other people that like say yes to everything, but they're like, "Oh, no, no, no," you're like, they're like grumbling and like mad about it, right?
Yep.
Like, and then you're like feeling guilty for asking them. And I'm like, I would much rather ask someone and they say no,
Yeah.
and then find someone who wants to joyfully say yes. And then I'm like, yeah, we can get your help there. So I know that's been a big thing for me. There's a lot of stuff in the book about boundaries, but that's personally been a huge one for me.
Yeah, that's such a great perspective, and honestly, I'm really encouraged and convicted talking to you right now. So, that's good. I wanna talk a little bit about, like, ministry culture. This is more in the perspective of a church, but do you think that, like, the perfect ministry or the perfect church exists?
No, and
It's a
well,
loaded question.
it is a really loaded question. Yes, because Jesus set it up, right?
Yeah,
So like,
his
yes,
church is perfect.
his church. But I mean, that's the thing. It's the kind of the beauty of ministry and the beauty of church is that he chooses to use flawed people to
Yeah.
do it.
Mhm.
And so while abuse happens, which is horrible,
Mhm.
and manipulation happens and all of these negative things that happen because of people, because we're flawed people, at the same time, to me it paints a beauty of God, the fact that like the church can keep advancing even in the middle of scandal, even in the middle of abuse, even in the middle of horrible things that people do.
Yeah.
And so I mean, so in a sense the church is perfect, like the church is perfect because it's the body of Christ, right? Like it
Mhm.
is, we're accomplishing the purpose for which we were created, right?
Mhm.
um at the same time, no, there's no such thing as a perfect church. You won't find a perfect church because um narcissists are largely drawn to leadership. So
Yeah.
not to say all pastors are narcissists, but you'll find a lot of narcissists in pastoral leadership, because once you have power, and it's amazing the amount of power you have over people whenever they look to you for spiritual guidance, right? Like
Yeah.
power doesn't corrupt, it just reveals the corruption that's already in our hearts, right? Like we
Right.
are already corrupt, we know that. So the more we have power, the more we have influence, there's just going to be this stuff, and it's a bummer. And that's not like a free pass for abuse to happen. Hopefully, like
Right.
I hope
Mhm.
nobody is listening to that like, oh, he's saying abuse is fine. No, abuse needs to be rooted out and done away with. But
Mhm.
at the same time, it is going to happen. And in a sense, it's a testimony. I got a chance to work under a pastor who had a moral failure. And like so many people were hesitant to work with him. And I'm like, it's kind of interesting because like I realized I could go there if I let myself go there.
Mhm.
Like I'm not above that. And I think in a sense, the flaws and failures of the church should remind us that none of us are above this. None of us are
Yeah.
above abusing power and all of these things. So hopefully it's a warning sign and it's a
Mhm.
check for us to keep our hearts pure. And then it's just, I don't know, it just shows the beauty and power of Jesus, that the church can keep going with all the flaws that we bring to the table.
Yeah, absolutely, and even when I first came into ministry, I was like It's so funny because I was saved in 2020, and a lot of people are still like, "Oh, like, you're a new Christian." I'm like, "It's been 4 years, like, how much
Yeah.
longer does it need to be?" But I went into ministry just a year later. Like, I was on fire for God, I was learning, I
Mhm.
was hustling, and I very much so had a lot of questions like, "God, am I ready? Do I know enough about the
Yeah.
Bible? Am I worthy?" And that's the cool thing about, people being called into ministry is, you don't necessarily have to go to school for it to be called. You don't have to
Yeah.
be a perfect person because only Jesus was. And so while leaders within the church are called to live above reproach, there's room for correction and grace. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
times the congregation forgets the grace part sometimes because
Yeah.
there is such a high calling to leaders in the church. And with that, I wanted to read one other small part of the book where you spoke on imperfect leaders. So the reason I asked you about whether or not church can be perfect, which I personally believe it cannot because we're just imperfect
Yeah.
people trying to live out God's perfect will for us. But you said here on page 34, the truth is people aren't attracted to perfect leaders. We're attracted to effective, humble leaders, even embracing their flaws as something endearing when those flaws are accompanied by humility. We're attracted to imperfect people because they give us hope that we can be effective too. We're actually drawn to more imperfect people than those who seem to have it all together. When someone in our lives seems to have everything together, there's no role for us in their life. We want to be needed, so their imperfection gives us space to exist. I
Mhm.
love that, and I hope if anyone takes anything away from my time in ministry or hearing my testimony, it's just that I'm just an imperfect person who is willing to be used by God. And it sounds like your journey is a lot of the same.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of the things I constantly am encouraging people whenever I do like my ask me anything thing on
Mhm.
Instagram is people are like, I don't feel adequate. I don't feel like I'm a new leader and I don't know if I have if I can do it.
Yeah.
And the thing that I constantly try to encourage people with, especially in leadership, is like, I don't want a perfect leader. I just want my leader to love me and to support
Yeah.
me and to
Mhm.
like care about the details of my life, right? Like I
Mhm.
want them to know who I am and not just see me as like an X or an O on like the playbook, right? Like,
Right.
oh, we're gonna put this person there to this person there. Like I want them to know, like, hey, how you doing this week? You struggling? Well, then take a week off, right? Like to actually care about the state of my heart and not just what I can do for the organization, right? So if we can love people, we're doing a pretty good job, right? Like
Mhm.
that's a big part of the Bible is loving others, getting along with people, considering other people's needs higher than our own. If you can do that, you're probably going to do a pretty good job in leadership.
Yeah. So our church in leadership, our mission is from street to seat, from seat to
Mhm.
circle, circle to street, and then street back to seat. So it's like a cycle, and it's all based on the core concept of love. If we love someone
Mhm.
enough to get them in the seat of a church, then they're going to find love to find a circle to where they can like learn and grow in community. Then they're going to go back out into the street, find more people to then bring them back to the seat of church, and that's like our entire mission. That's love and grace based. So I love that you just spoke to that. I have like two more questions for you. What is a realistic piece of advice that you would give to like your younger self or someone right now who's thinking like, I think I want to go into ministry, but we kind of talked about this. Maybe they feel like they're not good enough or they don't have enough education. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I mean, I think we alluded to this a little bit, but just the
Hmm.
idea that nobody is perfect. We
Yeah.
see we see the way things happen on Sunday morning and it looks beautiful. I heard a pastor one time talk about the illustration of a duck.
Hmm.
If you look at the duck on top of the pond, it looks so peaceful and calm. But if you were to look underneath the duck, you see these little paddling flippers, right? Or whatever they're
Hmm.
called. What are duck feet called? Whatever they're called.
I'm gonna Google it
Um,
after this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You see them just kind of like scurrying really fast, right?
Yeah.
They're kicking really fast, and that's what happens, with church. Is we make church happen. It's this beautiful thing, but there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of imperfection, a lot of like energy that goes behind it. So I forgot where I was going with that, but the idea is that like none of us are perfect. You're going to find out that like there are imperfect leaders, there are
Mhm.
imperfect people, and just the humility is so key. I think that's one of the things I love about people who are new Christians and
Yeah.
new in ministry is there's this humility that it's there that like they are willing to admit that they might make mistakes,
Mhm.
and I find that so refreshing. Whereas sometimes there's this draw to like, I'm perfect. I know everything.
Mhm.
I already know all the Bible, like I don't, like, I keep reading the Bible and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
That's in there? Like, I've never read that before, even though I read it before. Right. Like, so keeping a humility is key. And so I kind of think, bring that humility in the beginning, like be humble, go in, learn, and then hopefully keep that humility as you keep growing.
Absolutely. And I know for myself, like prayer is where I gained the most confidence when I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, God. Prayer was so essential. And then also just kind of having Christian mentors leading me through the process for accountability because the
Yeah.
last thing I wanted to do was misrepresent Christ. There's some things
Mhm.
that we can only learn through experience, but then God tells us not to lead by our own strength and that when we rely on his strength, his will be done. So if
Yeah.
you are feeling the call of ministry on your life and it is his will, he will not only equip you, but he will qualify you. And so
Yeah.
that's what I experienced. And then the last question I wanted to ask you is if someone is actively experiencing burnout right now that's in ministry listening to this, what would you prescribe to them?
Counseling.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, like it's funny. I was so many conversations I have in my DMs whenever I talk about burnout is like, I encourage them to go to counseling and they're like, wait, what? A Christian's telling me to go to counseling.
Mhm.
Like it's become a little bit more accepted in the US, but especially in like the UK, the idea of going to a counselor is
Yeah.
so foreign and so like anti-faith, like the idea
Mhm.
like I'm not, faithing my way through it. Right. Um, and there, I've heard it said that, if you're taking anxiety medication or if you're taking even headache medication, like,
Mhm.
right, like you take medication to fix the thing that's happening in your body. And it doesn't mean that it's anti-faith because the way a Christian should take that medication is to say, God, I trust you to use this medication to heal my body.
Yeah.
Right. So the same thing with counseling, same thing with medication. We can trust that God is going to use these tools that he
Mhm.
has given humanity wisdom to create to heal us and
Yeah.
to walk us through it. So I would just go to counseling. It
Mhm.
is going to be the best thing because there are in burnout, there are just things that start getting kind of folded and crumpled up in your life. And unless you have someone who can, from an outside perspective, help you unfold them and see them clearly, it's really hard to just bounce back from burnout, right? Like
Yeah.
you don't realize that burnout is the slow, steady descent into muck and yuck.
Mhm.
So you need to get someone to help you kind of get clean of that and get out of that. So counseling is my big recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely agree there. And also Jonathan's book that I mentioned, Don't Burn Out, Burn Bright, is a great resource too. If you're feeling like maybe you're not that far that you need counseling, but you want some encouragement, you've been feeling that sort of like situational burnout. This
Yeah.
book helped me a lot. I read it after Christmas. As you said, Christmas and Easter is definitely the time in ministry where it's like I call it the Super Bowl of ministry.
Yeah.
So his book, I'll link it below in the show notes, but do you have any other writing resources that you think kind of would help? Do you want to tell us about what else you've written?
Yeah. So if you lead volunteers in any
Mhm.
capacity, the volunteer effect is um, really how to get volunteers, how to keep them, and how to motivate them, which is like the three pain points that we've learned from churches that are the hard things with volunteers. So there's the volunteer effect, and then there's the comeback effect, which is all about welcoming. It's really more of a like how to it's hospitality versus like serving. It's a very key detail, but it's in the book, and I think it can change the way you approach um, being welcoming at your church to get more people to come in and stay and hear about the good news of Jesus. So those are kind of my three books that are the main ones that I have right now.
Cool. And then if somebody wants to find you on socials, you want to share your hilarious meme page?
Yeah, Instagram, it's at Jonathan Malm. Follow me, message me. I love talking to people. Leave funny, sarcastic comments on my videos. I'm down with it.
Yeah, I always go to the comments first, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, that's what I do on Instagram now with most memes. Like I'm like I love the comments. I was like bursting out laughing at like how clever people can be at one of these articles that I was reading this morning is so great. So, anyways,
Honestly,
comments,
that
yeah,
has become, like, the new way to comment. It's just, like, who can be the most sarcastic first.
yeah.
Like, I've noticed that
Hopefully
even
not mean, right?
and sometimes they're mean, but I do
Yeah,
laugh
yeah,
at them, and then I pray for
yeah.
forgiveness after.
Then you repent, yeah.
Yes. So, anyways, I just want to say thank you, Jonathan, for this conversation. And I really hope that, you're encouraged if you're listening to this conversation that maybe you've realized some things about ministry that it's not perfect. The last thing you want to do is go into a life with Christ and your work combined, thinking that it's going to just be this happy bliss bubble, because there are still realities to it, but it can be such a joy filled, such a fulfilling career path if the Lord is calling you there. So I just want to thank you for being a part of the conversation and for lending your wisdom and just I can tell you have such a like gentle heart about you. And I really am encouraged after our conversation.
Good. I'm glad. It's fun being here.
Cool. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to Christ in Me with Addie, and I will see you next time.